Hello, and welcome to the Privacy Periodical. This is the Good Fellow of Information Privacy, and what follows is the most important thing I have published. The UK Home Office consultation on facial recognition in policing closes at 11:59 p.m. on the 12th of February, 2026. If you live in Britain, what happens next depends in part on whether you respond. I will tell you how at the end. On the 10th of December, 2025, 6 days after the Home Office opened that consultation, Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood sat down with Tony Blair at the former Prime Minister's Institute Christmas party. She told the audience that her vision, formed during her previous role as Justice Secretary before a September 2025 cabinet reshuffle moved her to the Home Office, was to achieve, by means of artificial intelligence and technology, what Jeremy Bentham tried to do with his Panopticon. The eyes of the state, she said, can be on you at all times. Mahmood was not quoting a critic. She was not issuing a warning. She was describing a policy aspiration, one she had carried from the Ministry of Justice into the department responsible for policing, immigration, and national security. When the remarks were reported by The Telegraph in January 2026, Labour peer Baroness Shami Chakrabarti said she assumed the quotes were fake news. She could not believe such language from a Labour cabinet minister. A government source told The Telegraph the remarks referred to monitoring convicted criminals, not the general population. But Mahmood did not say convicted criminals. She said you. While that statement sits in the public record, the Home Office consultation asks whether to give police forces a statutory green light to scan faces in crowds, search government photograph databases, and build permanent facial recognition infrastructure across British cities. Part 1. The case for facial recognition. Honesty requires confronting the strongest arguments first. The numbers are not trivial, and the victims behind them are real. Between September 2024 and September 2025, the Metropolitan Police recorded 962 arrests, directly resulting from live facial recognition deployments across 203 operations in all 32 London boroughs. Over a quarter related to violence against women and girls, including rape, domestic abuse, and stalking. During the summer disorder of August 2024, retrospective facial recognition contributed to 127 arrests where suspects had been captured on closed-circuit television, but could not be identified through conventional means. Officers matched faces within hours rather than the weeks traditional investigation would require. The Home Office estimates personnel costs per arrest are up to 25% lower when using live facial recognition compared with traditional methods. Recent data from Croydon, where the UK's first permanent live facial recognition cameras were installed in October 2025, shows over 100 arrests and a claimed 12% crime reduction in Fairfield Ward within 3 months. Strip away the political rhetoric, and the strongest case for facial recognition is narrow and specific. It helps identify individuals already wanted for serious offences who would otherwise evade justice. The rape survivor whose attacker is identified at a football match. The family of a murder victim whose suspect is matched from CCTV. These are real people with real claims on the state's duty to protect them. This article does not dismiss those claims. It argues that the framework proposed by the consultation does not confine facial recognition to this narrow, targeted use, that the political rhetoric has already moved far beyond it, and that the infrastructure being built serves a concerning purpose that its architects have stated in plain language. Part 2. What is being proposed? The Home Office consultation, published on the 4th of December 2025, contains 17 questions spanning biometric identification, inferential technologies, and object recognition. Understanding what is proposed requires reading what the document says, what it does not say, and what is already happening without legislation. The consultation covers 3 distinct technology categories. First, facial recognition itself. Live facial recognition, or LFR, cameras extract faces from video feeds, map facial geometry, and convert each face into a mathematical template. NEC Corporation's NeoFace Watch. the primary system used by UK police for live deployments, compares these templates against a preloaded watch list and returns a probability score. An operator then confirms or rejects the match. The entire process, detection, template creation, matching, occurs in real time as individuals pass a camera. Retrospective facial recognition works differently. Officers submit a still image, typically from CCTV or a witness photograph, and search it against the police national database's approximately 19 million custody images. The Cognitech algorithm returns a ranked candidate list treated as intelligence, not evidence. Officers must visually verify any match and seek corroborative evidence before acting. Approximately 25,000 such searches are conducted monthly across all forces. Operator-initiated facial recognition is the most intrusive variant. An individual officer photographs a person using a mobile device and searches the image against databases on the spot. No deployment-level authorization is required under the consultation's proposed framework. The decision rests with the individual officer. Second, the consultation asks whether its framework should extend to biometric identification beyond the face, including voice recognition, iris scanning, and gait analysis. Gait recognition identifies individuals by walking pattern, stride length, limb movement, posture, and speed, and can operate at distances of up to 50 meters through face coverings and without the subject's cooperation or knowledge. In controlled laboratory conditions, published accuracy exceeds 90%. In real-world surveillance settings with varied clothing, carried objects, and occlusion, it drops to as low as 50%. Ireland is legislating to give police gait and voice biometric powers. A UK police advisory body has recommended adding gait recognition to the investigative toolkit. The consultation would provide the legal basis to do so. Third, the consultation proposes covering inferential and emotion detection technologies. These are AI systems that infer emotional or mental states from body movements, facial microexpressions, and vocal tone. The Home Office describes them as capable of helping police spot behavior associated with criminal activity or detect suicidal intent in members of the public. The scientific validity of emotion recognition is deeply contested. The inferential premise that physical movements reliably correlate with internal mental states is the same logic underpinning polygraph testing, which courts in most jurisdictions reject as unreliable. The American Civil Liberties Union has stated that emotion recognition lacks scientific foundation. The EUAI Act bans emotion recognition in policing, workplaces, schools, and border management outright. The UK consultation proposes authorizing it. And fourth, object recognition. This identifies clothing, bags, vehicles, and personal belongings rather than biometric features. An individual can be followed across a camera network by appearance alone, even if their face is never matched. Combined with facial recognition and gait analysis, object recognition completes a surveillance system that does not depend on any single biometric modality succeeding. 3 authorization tiers are proposed. Live facial recognition in crowded places requires chief officer authorization. Retrospective facial recognition requires a designated officer. Operator-initiated, where an officer photographs an individual, requires only the individual officer's judgment. No tier requires judicial pre-authorization. The EU AI Act, by contrast, mandates prior judicial or independent administrative authorization for any real-time biometric identification in public spaces, with only a narrow urgency exception requiring authorization within 24 hours. The consultation proposes consolidating the Biometrics and Surveillance Camera Commissioner with the Forensic Science Regulator into a single oversight body. This body would issue codes of practice, investigate complaints, and request information from law enforcement. It would not have the power to pre-authorize or block deployments. The most consequential proposal is extending police access beyond custody images to government photograph databases. The Police National Database holds approximately 20 million custody images. The Passport Database holds approximately 50 million. The Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency database holds approximately 50 million driving license photographs. The immigration and asylum biometric system holds between 17 and 25 million, though some estimates run as high as 92 million. Even accounting for overlap between databases, we are talking about approximately 150 million unique photographs. The consultation frames database access as a question for public input, but searches of the passport database have already been happening since 2019, increasing from 2 searches in 2020 to 417 in 2023, with a further 377 between January and October 2024. The Crime and Policing Bill 2025, Clause 95, would provide statutory authority for police access to DVLA, driving license information. The infrastructure is being built in advance of the law that would authorize it. In October 2025, Croydon became the first UK location with permanently installed live facial recognition cameras, mounted on lampposts rather than deployed from vans. This represents a shift from temporary announced deployments to persistent surveillance infrastructure. The consultation document does not distinguish between mobile and permanent installations in its proposed authorization framework. The same passport and DVLA databases that the consultation proposes opening to police are the databases underpinning the UK's expanding digital identity infrastructure. gov.uk One Login, the gov.uk Wallet, and the Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework are normalizing routine biometric verification against government records. What begins as convenience for accessing government services becomes, via the consultation, searchable infrastructure for mass biometric surveillance. Function creep is not a risk, it is the design. Part 3. The legal void. No UK statute mentions facial recognition. Parliament has debated its use on several occasions across both houses, but has never legislated on it or held a binding vote on dedicated facial recognition law. The legal framework consists entirely of common law principles, European Convention on Human Rights case law, data protection legislation not designed for biometric surveillance, and non-binding guidance from the Information Commissioner's Office and former commissioners. As Baroness Chakrabarti observed on BBC Radio 4, in August 2025, it is, quote, particularly odd that this has all been developed pretty much completely outside the law, end quote. The landmark Court of Appeal judgment in Bridges versus Chief Constable of South Wales Police in 2020 established critical precedent. Ed Bridges, a Cardiff Civil Liberties campaigner, challenged South Wales Police's use of live facial recognition at a protest and a shopping centre. The Court of Appeal found the deployment unlawful on 3 grounds. First, the framework left too wide a discretion regarding who could be placed on watch lists and where facial recognition could be deployed. Second, the data protection impact assessment failed to adequately assess the interference with rights. Third, South Wales Police failed to investigate whether the NEC algorithm exhibited bias against people with protected characteristics. The judgment did not ban facial recognition. It held that had the legal framework been adequate, the interference with privacy rights could have been proportionate. Police forces continue expanding deployments, claiming compliance with the Bridges requirements, while civil society argues the fundamental gaps remain unaddressed. 13 years after a 2012 High Court ruling that retention of acquitted persons' custody images is unlawful, millions of images remain in police databases. The Police National Database contains approximately 20 million custody images. A substantial but undisclosed proportion belong to individuals never convicted of any offence. The database has no bulk deletion capability. The National Police Lead acknowledged to the House of Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee that this poses significant risk for both litigation and technology use. The EU AI Act, effective from August 2024, prohibits real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces, except for narrow exceptions requiring prior judicial authorization, temporal and geographic limitations, mandatory fundamental rights impact assessments, and limitation to specific serious offences. Critically, the Act does not prohibit retrospective biometric identification. classifying it as high risk but permitted under regulatory safeguards. Given that retrospective facial recognition is a major component of UK police use, this distinction matters. The Act bans untargeted scraping of facial images, emotion recognition in workplaces and schools, and biometric categorization systems inferring race, political opinions, or religious beliefs. Penalties reach €35 million, or 7% of global revenue. The EU AI Act's Prohibited Practices provisions became fully effective on the 2nd of February 2025, exactly 1 year before the UK consultation closes. Where the UK consultation proposes chief officer authorization, the EU mandates judicial oversight. Where the EU requires judicial pre-authorization, UK police make internal decisions. Where the EU mandates fundamental rights assessments, UK guidance requires only data protection impact assessments. The broader international consensus extends well beyond facial recognition. The European Data Protection Board has called since 2021 for a general ban on any use of AI, for automated recognition of human features in publicly accessible spaces, explicitly listing faces, gait, fingerprints, DNA, voice, and keystroke patterns. The Council of Europe's Convention 108 Plus guidelines state that effect recognition should be prohibited. Canada's Privacy Commissioner published guidance in August 2025, explicitly identifying inferential emotion biometrics as a privacy concern requiring strict limits. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for a ban on remote biometric systems, stating that emotion recognition lacks scientific basis for reliably inferring internal states from physical expressions. The UK consultation proposes authorizing every technology that this international consensus seeks to prohibit or restrict. The divergence is not limited to facial recognition. It extends across the full spectrum of biometric and inferential surveillance. The United Nations Human Rights Committee, in its March 2024 periodic review of the UK, expressed concern about the increased use by police forces of facial recognition technology to monitor peaceful gatherings and called on the UK specifically to end the use of facial recognition and other mass surveillance technologies at protests. The UK is now subject to formal international human rights body criticism for its facial recognition expansion. Sean Thompson, a black anti-knife crime volunteer with the organisation Street Fathers, was wrongly flagged by facial recognition outside London Bridge Station in February 2024. He was detained for approximately 30 minutes and had his fingerprints demanded despite producing multiple forms of identification. Thompson described the experience as humiliating and frightening. He is now a co-claimant in Thompson and Carlo versus Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis, heard in the High Court on the 27th and 28th of January 2026. The hearing revealed that the Met used facial recognition technology 231 times in 2025, scanning approximately 4 million faces. On the 17th of December 2025 alone, an Oxford Circus deployment scanned over 50,000 faces in 4.5 hours. The claimants argued that the Met's serious crime threshold, offences carrying 1 year or more imprisonment, is uniquely broad, encompassing offences as minor as stealing a bicycle. They also highlighted that identical watch lists containing 16,000 to 17,000 names are deployed simultaneously in completely different locations across London. Judgment is reserved. The Equality and Human Rights Commission intervened, declaring the Met's live facial recognition policy not merely problematic, but unlawful and incompatible with Articles 8, 10, and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights, covering privacy, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly. This represents the first time the UK's equality regulator has formally argued in court that a police surveillance policy violates human rights law. Part 4. The political context. The current trajectory was set in the summer of 2024, when the Starmer government responded to the post-Southport disorder by announcing a national violent disorder program with facial recognition at its centre. Then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper positioned facial recognition as a targeted tool for catching serious criminals. Those wanted by courts, those who should be returned to prison, and those breaching sexual harm prevention orders. Following the September 2025 cabinet reshuffle, triggered by the resignation of Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, Mahmood replaced Cooper at the Home Office. Cooper moved to the Foreign Office. The policy trajectory did not change. The rhetoric escalated. In August 2025, the Home Office confirmed the deployment of 10 live facial recognition vans to 7 additional police forces. On the 26th of January 2026, the day before the Thompson and Carlo hearing began, the government released its policing white paper announcing 40 additional LFR vans, bringing the total to £26 million for a national facial recognition system and £115 million over 3 years for a national centre for AI in policing. Home Secretary Mahmood declared this the most significant modernisation of policing in nearly 200 years. Every police force in England and Wales will have access. Permanent camera installations are under active consideration. The government is consulting the public on whether to create a legal framework for facial recognition while simultaneously expanding its use. 10 vans became 50 before the consultation opened. Passport database searches were happening before the consultation asked whether they should be permitted. Permanent cameras are planned before the consultation concludes. Crime and Policing Minister Sarah Jones described facial recognition as the biggest breakthrough for catching criminals since DNA matching. This is the language of a settled policy decision, not an open consultation. When announcing the policing white paper on the 27th of January 2026, Mahmood explicitly rejected criticism of the surveillance expansion, saying, quote, "For 20 years, we've been talking about Big Brother societies. I just really reject that analysis." End quote. The juxtaposition is striking. In December 2025, she invoked the Panopticon as aspiration. In January 2026, she dismissed concerns about surveillance as outdated. A cross-party coalition of 65 parliamentarians and 31 organisations called in October 2023 for an immediate halt to live facial recognition surveillance. The coalition includes Conservative MP David Davis, Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey, and Green MP Caroline Lucas. Baroness Chakrabarti has warned of a total surveillance society and identified challenges to privacy, freedom of assembly and association, and problems with race and sex discrimination. Part 5. Britain stands alone. The UK's position as an outlier is not a rhetorical claim. It is empirically observable across the democratic world. The European Union's AI Act prohibits real-time biometric identification in public spaces. Over 20 American cities have banned it, including San Francisco, Boston, and Minneapolis. Maryland passed the strongest state law in 2024, banning use on sketches, prohibiting real-time identification, and limiting searches to driving license and custody images only. Belgium declared facial recognition illegal under existing national law, though police admitted using Clearview AI between 101 and 500 times. Germany has constitutional restrictions on mass biometric surveillance, though expansion is actively debated. Australia's Human Rights Commission recommended a moratorium, though the government is proceeding with infrastructure. Canada's Privacy Commissioner called for a moratorium. However, the American picture is complex. Virginia outlawed local police use in 2021, then approved limited use in 2022. New Orleans amended its 2020 ban in 2022 to permit use for violent crime investigations. The regulatory trajectory is not uniformly restrictive, but no peer democracy is actively expanding at the UK's pace. Among European and Five Eyes democracies, the UK is a clear outlier. Though India deploys facial recognition across 983 railway stations and over 280,000 cameras in Delhi, France deployed AI-powered biometric surveillance for the 2024 Paris Olympics, and Brazil has active facial recognition in policing. The UK's expansion is exceptional among its closest democratic peers, even if not globally unique. The Ada Lovelace Institute concluded in May 2025 that the UK's approach is fragmented and piecemeal, and warned that the country risks becoming a regulatory sandbox for surveillance technologies, a jurisdiction where systems prohibited in the EU can be deployed freely. Part 6. The Panopticon. When a Home Secretary invokes Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon as a model for government policy, the intellectual history demands examination. This is not a metaphor deployed by critics. It is a framework chosen by the architect of the policy herself. Bentham's Panopticon, proposed in 1787, was a circular prison built around a central observation tower. The cells were arranged around the circumference, each visible from the tower but unable to see into it. The guards could observe any inmate at any time, but the inmates could never know whether they were being watched at any given moment. The architectural logic was precise. If prisoners must assume they are always observed, they regulate their own behavior without constant physical coercion. Surveillance becomes self-enforcing. The power of the system lies not in watching everyone all the time, which is impossible, but in making everyone believe they could be watched at any time. The Panopticon was primarily designed for prisoners, people convicted of crimes, stripped of liberty by due process. It operates by eliminating the distinction between the watched and the unwatched. Everyone is presumed subject to observation. Applying this model to public streets means treating every citizen as a presumptive subject of state scrutiny, with no prior suspicion required. The presumption of innocence is reversed. The burden shifts from the state proving cause to observe you to you proving you have nothing to hide. A Home Secretary, modeling public space on a prison, is proposing that the relationship between citizen and state should mirror the relationship between inmate and guard. This is not a surveillance debate. It is a constitutional one. What makes Mahmood's statement extraordinary is the deliberate adoption of the Panopticon not as critique, but as aspiration. Government ministers typically describe facial recognition as a targeted tool used against serious criminals. Mahmood's formulation abandons that framing entirely. The eyes of the state can be on you at all times is not a description of targeted policing. It is a description of comprehensive surveillance, universal, persistent, and explicitly modeled on a prison. The government's defense, that Mahmood was referring to convicted criminals, does not survive contact with the technology being deployed. Live facial recognition scans every face in a crowd. It does not distinguish between convicted criminals and everyone else until after the scan. The Panopticon's logic applies to the entire population passing the cameras, not merely those on a watch list. Facial recognition technology is the technological realization of what Bentham imagined. Van-mounted cameras scanning every face in a crowd. Permanent installations on street infrastructure. Mobile apps allowing any officer to photograph any person and search them against government databases. The conditions of the Panopticon are no longer architectural. They are computational. Empirical research confirms that awareness of surveillance changes behavior. The Penny Wikipedia study found a statistically significant decline in traffic to terrorism-related articles following the Snowden revelations. Evidence of self-censorship in response to surveillance awareness. PEN America's survey of 520 American writers found widespread self-censorship on subjects including military affairs, mass incarceration, and drug policies. The European Court of Human Rights, in Gluckin versus Russia, explicitly recognized that the use of highly intrusive facial recognition technology to identify and arrest participants of peaceful protest actions could have a chilling effect on freedom of expression and assembly. Russia deployed facial recognition for protest surveillance. Mass protests subsequently declined sharply. The Panopticon does not need to watch everyone to be effective. It needs to be believed capable of watching anyone. The literary warnings are well worn, but no less urgent. Orwell's 1984 imagined the telescreen. Huxley's Brave New World imagined compliance through comfort. Bentham designed the architecture that makes both possible. Václav Smil's work on how systems of control scale through infrastructure, rather than ideology, completes the picture. Part 7. The bias evidence. The technical evidence on demographic bias is extensive and consistent. It does not support the claim that facial recognition technology is ready for equitable deployment at scale. The NEC algorithm used for live facial recognition showed no statistically significant demographic bias at the operational threshold of 0.6, according to the National Physical Laboratory's 2023 equitability study. The Met Police cites this as its primary defense. However, this finding rests on 7 false matches in total, a sample Professor Peter Fussey of the University of Essex considers far too small to draw universal conclusions from. Fussey has stated that the police claims are not substantiated by the facts in that report. Bias did emerge at lower threshold settings. Operational thresholds are set by individual forces, not by statute, and can be adjusted without external oversight. Metropolitan Police data from September 2024 to September 2025 recorded 10 false positives from 2,077 alerts across 203 deployments. Of the 10 false positives, 8 involved black individuals, approximately 80%, despite black residents comprising approximately 13% of London's population. The Met described the figure as not statistically significant, given the small numbers, and attributed it to deployment locations with higher black populations. The significance of that explanation, that police choose to deploy in areas with higher black populations, producing racially disproportionate outcomes, appears to have been lost on the force. This mirrors patterns documented internationally. Amnesty International's Decode Surveillance NYC project found that in New York, higher proportions of non-white residents correlated with higher concentrations of facial recognition-compatible cameras. The National Physical Laboratory's December 2025 report on the Cognitech algorithm used for police national database searches found dramatic demographic disparities in false positive rates. For white subjects, the false positive rate was 0.04%. For black subjects, 5.5%. That is 138 times higher. This algorithm processes approximately 25,000 searches monthly across all police forces. A 5.5% false positive rate for black subjects means that for every 1,000 searches involving a black person's face, 55 will generate an incorrect match. For black women, the figure is 99 per 1,000. When the data is further disaggregated, the disparities deepen. Black female subjects experienced a 9.9% false positive rate versus 0.4% for black male subjects, a 25-fold disparity within the same racial category. That is 248 times the white baseline. The system tested is version 5.5, licensed in 2020. The current version is 9.9. Cognitech's marketing manager has confirmed that multiple upgrades since version 5.5 have improved accuracy and minimized bias, and that the face-finding technology was completely replaced in a subsequent update. UK police have not upgraded, despite multiple intervening versions claiming improved accuracy and reduced bias. However, the National Physical Laboratory report notes that a new algorithm has been procured by the Home Office and independently tested with no statistically significant bias. It is due for operational testing in early 2026. The question is why the outdated, demonstrably biased system remained in operational use for years while a replacement was available. The National Institute of Standards and Technology's March 2025 Face Recognition Technology. Evaluation data shows the top 100 algorithms now achieve 99.5% or higher accuracy across all demographics, and NEC topped the one-to-many identification leaderboard in April 2025. This makes the UK's continued use of Cognitech version 5.5, with its 138-fold racial disparity, a choice about procurement negligence rather than an inherent limitation of the technology. The negligence argument is arguably more powerful than the technology is biased argument. The tools to do better exist and have for years. A December 2025 Liberty Investigates report revealed that UK police forces successfully lobbied to continue using a facial recognition algorithm known to exhibit demographic bias. Internal documents showed that when offered a more accurate algorithm, forces rejected it because it returned results of limited benefit, meaning fewer matches. Police chose higher match rates over lower bias rates. This revelation, emerging during the consultation period, raises fundamental questions about whether operational priorities will override equity considerations, regardless of the legal framework adopted. Understanding facial recognition accuracy requires distinguishing between fundamentally different calculation methods. The Metropolitan Police claims a false positive rate of 1 in 6,000, but this measures false positives against total faces scanned, not against matches made. Big Brother Watch's analysis shows that 85% of total matches have been false since the Met's first deployment in 2016. 150 false matches out of 175 total. The Independent University of Essex review found 63.6% of matches leading to stops were inaccurate. South Wales Police documented an 89.9% false match rate, 2,825 out of 3,140 flags. These are not contradictory figures. They measure different things. But the choice of which statistic to emphasize shapes public understanding dramatically. NEC has refused to disclose the composition of its training data, the images used to develop the algorithm that decides who gets flagged. During the 2020 Bridges appeal, NEC's head of global facial recognition declined to explain the makeup of the training datasets, claiming commercial sensitivity. South Wales Police itself did not know the composition, having to ask NEC, which then refused. Without transparency on training data, independent assessment of bias sources is impossible. Part 8. Technical infrastructure and security risks. UK police forces use NEC's NeoFace watch system for live facial recognition and Cognitec's algorithm for retrospective searches. The live system processes video feeds from cameras mounted on police vans and increasingly from permanent street infrastructure, extracting facial biometric data and comparing it against a preloaded watch list in real time. In addition to NEC and Cognitec, UK police have contracted with Digital Barriers, which subcontracts the software element to CoreSight AI, an Israeli company. Essex Police confirmed through Freedom of Information responses that CoreSight's technology is embedded in their live facial recognition system. An investigation by Action on Armed Violence found that Essex Police holds no centralized log of meetings with vendors and refused to confirm whether officers had met CoreSight representatives, claiming the search would exceed cost and time limits. CoreSight's board of directors includes former Israeli intelligence and security officials. The company has faced questions about its supply chain practices and, according to venture capital sources, is now considered financially problematic with investors pulling back. UK police forces appear to have no systematic due diligence process for monitoring the stability or practices of subcontractors providing critical surveillance technology. Police watch lists have grown from under 7,000 names in 2022 to over 16,000 in 2025. An investigation by The Times and Liberty Investigates, published December 2025, found that children as young as 12 are included on live facial recognition watch lists, with at least 1,600 instances across 6 police forces. South Wales Police alone placed 632 under-18s on watch lists since 2022, 6 of whom were under 13. Children's Commissioner Dame Rachel D'Souza said she was deeply concerned by the findings. The Home Office consultation does not propose any specific safeguards regarding minors on watch lists. Facial recognition systems are also vulnerable to adversarial manipulation. Published research has demonstrated successful evasion using adversarial patches on clothing, specialized makeup patterns that disrupt facial geometry extraction, and infrared LED arrays invisible to the human eye but capable of projecting false facial features to cameras. The Penn State Live Bugger framework found in 2022 that all four common facial liveness verification methods could be easily bypassed by deepfakes. Face masks remain, according to Duke University researcher Emily Wenger, one of the few surefire ways of evading these systems. The technologies the consultation proposes to authorize face a foundational scientific challenge. A landmark 2019 meta-analysis, led by Lisa Feldman Barrett, reviewed over 1,000 published findings and concluded that there is no scientific support for the common assumption that a person's emotional state can be readily inferred from his or her facial movements. Subjects made the expected facial expression matching their reported emotional state only 20 to 30% of the time. HireVue, the largest AI hiring platform, removed its facial analysis component in 2020 after an internal audit found that non-verbal data contributed just 0.25% to the model's overall predictive power. For gait recognition, no authoritative independent benchmark exists. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, whose face recognition vendor test is the global standard for facial recognition evaluation, maintains no equivalent program for gait or emotion recognition systems. Privacy-enhancing technologies are sometimes proposed as mitigations. The civil society consensus rejects this framing. The American Civil Liberties Union argued in 2024 that human review of facial recognition results often exacerbates, rather than ameliorates, the deep unreliability of this technology. The European Digital Rights Network and the Electronic Privacy Information Center maintain that technical safeguards cannot address the fundamental civil liberties harm of mass biometric surveillance. The chilling effect on behavior exists whether or not the underlying data is encrypted. The EU chose prohibition. The UK consultation proposes authorization with oversight. The question is whether oversight can remedy what the scientific evidence suggests is a validity problem, not merely an implementation problem. The proposed database integration would create a composite identity system linking passport photographs, DVLA records, immigration images, and police custody images. A successful breach of any connected system could expose biometric data for a substantial proportion of the UK adult population. Unlike passwords, biometric data cannot be reset after compromise. NEC Corporation is the dominant vendor for live facial recognition across UK police forces. This near single-vendor dependency creates supply chain risk. Training data composition, algorithm updates, and vulnerability patches are controlled by a single foreign entity whose training data the public is not permitted to examine. Clearview AI, which scraped billions of social media photographs to build a facial recognition database, has withdrawn from UK, EU, Canadian, and Australian markets entirely following regulatory action. In October 2025, the upper tribunal overturned the first-tier tribunal and ruled that the Information Commissioner's Office does have jurisdiction over Clearview AI, a significant reassertion of UK regulatory reach over foreign facial recognition companies. Clearview was granted permission to appeal in December 2025, and the case has been sent back to a new first-tier tribunal on the merits and the £7.5 million fine. The case illustrates how facial recognition companies can build comprehensive databases of individuals who have never been suspected of any crime, a capability the Home Office consultation would now extend to government photograph databases. In April 2026, the Home Office will deliver initial prototypes of a predictive policing AI system funded with £4 million in public money, with a full national platform planned for 2030. The integration of facial recognition infrastructure with predictive analytics creates a system that moves from identifying known suspects to attempting to predict future criminal behavior. The Crime and Policing Bill 2025 includes provisions for face-covering bans at protests and respect orders that could be enforced through automated recognition. The trajectory from identification to prediction to preemptive intervention is visible in the policy pipeline. This convergence is the central finding across our coverage of UK surveillance policy in 2025 and 2026. The Online Safety Act builds the identity layer, age verification, content scanning, VPN detection schemes. The digital identity infrastructure builds the authentication layer, gov.uk. One login, biometric verification normalized through companies' house mandates. The facial recognition consultation builds the biometric surveillance layer, cameras, databases, watch lists. The encryption debate threatens the confidentiality layer, backdoor mandates and client-side scanning. And predictive policing AI connects them all into a system that does not merely identify suspects but attempts to predict them. No single piece of legislation creates a surveillance state. The architecture emerges from the interaction between them. Part 9. How to respond. The breadth of opposition to facial recognition expansion from civil society, regulators, and academic institutions is unprecedented for a UK policing technology. Big Brother Watch has emerged as the leading organization fighting facial recognition in the UK. It describes the technology as an Orwellian and authoritarian technology that treats millions of innocent people like suspects. Its director, Silky Carlo, is co-claimant alongside Sean Thompson in the landmark High Court case. The organization published 2 major investigative reports. Face Off in 2018 found a 95% inaccuracy rate across police trials. Biometric Britain in 2023 documented that 89% of live facial recognition matches by the Met and South Wales Police had been wrong since the technology was introduced. Liberty provided full legal representation for Ed Bridges in the world's first successful legal challenge to police facial recognition, winning on 3 of 5 grounds of appeal. Its investigative arm, Liberty Investigates, broke several of the most significant stories of 2025. That police forces knew about facial recognition bias for over a year without disclosing it. That children as young as 12 appeared on watch lists. And that police scanned more than 5 million faces with facial recognition cameras in 2024 alone. Liberty's Director of External Relations, Ruth Ehrlich, described the January 2026 announcement of 40 additional vans as one of the most significant threats to civil liberties in the history of British policing. A global coalition of over 130 organizations issued a joint statement in September 2023, calling for an immediate worldwide halt to facial recognition surveillance. Coordinated by the European Digital Rights Network and Big Brother Watch, the coalition united 120 civil society organizations across 6 continents, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the Algorithmic Justice League. 65 cross-party parliamentarians, 38 MPS and 27 peers, signed a letter in October 2023 calling for an immediate stop. Signatories included Conservative former Brexit Secretary David Davis, Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey, Green MP Caroline Lucas, and Baroness Chakrabarti. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has intervened in the Thompson case, arguing the Met's policy is unlawful. Its chief executive, John Kirkpatrick, stated that the Met's current policy falls short of the standard required by human rights law. The Information Commissioner's Office published detailed guidance in August 2025, requiring law enforcement to demonstrate that any deployment is strictly necessary. When the bias report emerged in December 2025, Deputy Commissioner Emily Keeney demanded urgent clarity from the Home Office, stating it was disappointing that the ICO had not been informed about the bias despite regular engagement. The Ada Lovelace Institute published its Governance Analysis, An Eye on the Future, in May 2025, concluding that the UK's approach is fragmented and piecemeal, and that facial recognition exists in a legal grey area. Professor Peter Fusi of the University of Essex conducted the only independent evaluation of UK police live facial recognition. His report found that alerts were verifiably accurate in fewer than 20% of cases, making the system operationally ineffective. He publicly challenged the Met's claims in August 2025, stating that the claims the Met are making about the absence of bias from the NPL report are not substantiated by the facts in that report. The US National Academy's report in January 2024, The most authoritative government-sponsored consensus study on facial recognition concluded that advances in facial recognition technology have outpaced laws and regulations. The UK is proceeding with expansion while peer democracies call for restraint. The consultation also focuses on law enforcement, but private sector deployment is expanding rapidly. FaceWatch, the leading UK retail facial recognition provider, sent over 516,000 real-time offender alerts to retailers in 2025, double the previous year. Retailers using FaceWatch include Sainsbury's, Southern Co-op, Frasers Group, Home Bargains, Budgens, and Spar. Documented misidentifications include Sarah, aged 19, wrongly ejected from Home Bargains Manchester after being flagged as a shoplifter, and Warren Raja, a decade-long Sainsbury's customer who was demanded to show his barcode and escorted out. The Home Office survey in January 2025 showed 64% support and 11% opposition. But the Ada Lovelace Institute found 57% of Black respondents and 52% of Asian respondents expressed concern, compared to 39% of the general population. A January 2026 survey found only 55% trust police to use it responsibly, down from 79% in 2020. Crucially, only around 10% feel confident they understand how and when facial recognition is used. Support expressed in polls may not survive contact with operational reality. The consultation closes at 11:59 p.m. on the 12th of February 2026. The Home Office gives more weight to unique, personalized responses than template submissions. Email your response to fr-consultation@homeoffice.gov.uk. Write to your MP at writetotham.com. Find your MP at members.parliament.uk. The cross-party coalition of 65 MPS is already calling for a halt. Ask whether facial recognition is being deployed in your constituency. Big Brother Watch provides template responses you can personalize at bigbrotherwatch.org.uk. Support the legal challenges. The Thompson and Carlo case is pending judgment. The Crowd Justice Face-Off fundraiser is supporting the legal challenge against the Metropolitan Police. Here is what matters most. The consultation is not neutral. The government is consulting on a framework for expansion, not on whether facial recognition should be used. Expansion is already underway. 50 vans, permanent cameras planned. The passport database already searched without statutory authority. No democratic mandate exists. Parliament has never legislated on facial recognition. No statute mentions it. Racial bias is documented and severe, and it is a choice, not a constraint. 138-fold disparity in false positive rates, using an algorithm licensed in 2020 that has not been upgraded despite newer, demonstrably less biased alternatives being available. The UK is an international outlier among its closest peers, the only major European or Five Eyes democracy actively expanding mass biometric surveillance. The Home Secretary has said the quiet part aloud. Her explicit invocation of the Panopticon as policy aspiration, made 6 days after the consultation opened, transforms the debate from whether mass surveillance is an unintended consequence to whether it is the intended design. And facial recognition does not exist in isolation. It is one layer of a converging surveillance architecture. The Online Safety Act builds identity checkpoints across the internet. Digital identity infrastructure normalizes biometric verification. Encryption policy threatens the confidentiality that makes dissent possible. Predictive policing AI connects them into a system that does not merely identify suspects, but attempts to predict them. No single piece of legislation creates a surveillance state. The architecture emerges from the interaction between them. What we called drift 18 months ago has become a march. The question is no longer whether Britain is building a surveillance state. The Home Secretary has told you it is, and invoked a prison as her model. The question is whether you will respond before the 12th of February. This has been the Good Fellow of Information Privacy. The full article with all sources and references is available at the vpnmatrix.com. Thank you for listening.